On the day when you heard?
Well, it was quite an important day for me. The Secretary of the Trades and Labour Council, to whom I was the assistant, was on that day elevated to the Commission, the Arbitration Commission, and I was that morning before the Arbitration Commission arguing a case. The light flashed on the Commissioner's desk, he answered the phone. He then adjourned the case, called me into his anteroom and said, "Go out to Channel 7, the government's been dismissed."
What was your immediate reaction to that?
Well, I was just flabbergasted, and I acted on remote control, went out to Channel 7, debated Fred Chaney Sr., and as I started the debate, my anger just welled up, and I asked Labor supporters to come out and demonstrate very strongly in support of their government, which I still regarded as the legitimate government of Australia. I then got a phone call from Bob McMullen, who was then the Western Australian Secretary before he became the Federal Secretary, saying that Bob Hawke had called upon us all to calm down and fight the election. And I left the studio during a commercial break, walked around the block, came back, and with great reluctance, I must say, changed my pitch to the audience and called for calm and that we would win the forthcoming election.
Ros, what were you doing on the day?
Well, it's funny when you look back, you remember every little detail about it. I was in an office, and I remember listening to all the events on the radio, and I went out to DJs. I remember I went out to buy a pair of stockings. When I got back, I heard the news. I couldn't believe it. I thought that it was some sort of joke, that Whitlam had a magic trick up his sleeve. And after about an hour, when it became quite clear what had happened, I just spontaneously, with a lot of other people in Canberra, just went to Parliament House and Government House. And I remember when I got to Government House, there was a huge crowd there, and they were trying to move in on the gates, and the police were at the gates. And I was then a member of the Assembly, and I got a megaphone and stood in front of the crowd and tried to convince them that they shouldn't break down the gates. And I've always remembered that clash of wills when I was trying to impose my will on this crowd not to break through the gates. An occasion.
Did you have any anger yourself? That was there a part of you that would have liked to have joined them? And
you wanted to, but you saw little kids there that being squashed in, and you were so angry yourself, but you knew. Well, I thought that violence wasn't the way to solve the problem. You wanted to vent your anger in some way, and everyone just didn't know how to do it. We just felt that anger, and a lot of people just thought violence is the way out.
Peter, what were you doing?
I was driving.
Yep. How did you hear the news, Peter, and what was your reaction?
I was driving in my car and I thought it was an incredibly smart political move that what had happened is the government goes out, they pass supply in the Senate, we then go back into the House of Representatives and move a motion of no confidence in the government and Fraser's Prime Minister for about 10 minutes. I thought it was a brilliant political move. And then it started to come through that it wasn't a political move, it was fair income, and I was just totally shattered by it. I just couldn't believe it. And I was hostile and I was angry and I wanted violence, and I sort of didn't forgive Hawke for trying to calm it down, because I felt at that stage we had the closest we'd have to a genuine revolution or change of direction in Australia, and I wasn't all that happy with it being calmed down. A whole lot of other things, as Rod said, became meaningful. I mean, I've never been able to properly listen to Advance Australia Fair without tears in my eyes since that day, and it was just terrific.
What did you do that day? How did you vent your anger or frustration?
Well, I went up to the Curtin pub first, I think, and tried to get everybody on the streets, and we all ended up in the city square and things such as that. And I'm not sure whether it was that day or the next day when we had another rally. I think it was that day. Just buckets went around for funds for the election, and we picked up $30,000 in dustbins in the city square, things like that. Everybody was just outraged. They couldn't believe it. People came out of the office buildings and stood on the streets. It really was.
With hindsight, though, you could understand that for Labor leaders trying to act responsibly, even within that climate, that for a Labor leader to actually urge people to take to the streets in any kind of angry way, it would have been unleashing potentially a very unpredictable force.
Yeah, it would have, but I mean, I'm not saying we're all rational at that stage, or I don't even know whether it would have been a good or bad thing. Maybe that madness, if it had run for a while, would have changed the direction of the country or had some positive outcome.
The aspect that tortures me about this is that as a union leader at that time, that had we then gone into a 24-hour stoppage or a 48-hour stoppage in support of the Labor government, it may well have focused the attention of people who later in the election voted on the economy and not on the dismissal back to what was the real deep-seated anger of the Australian community about the dismissal, and caused the election to be argued on the issues of democracy and the right of government to govern.
But one of the major problems was the government at the time didn't have a great deal of credibility, and so the issue sort of got lost as the campaign went on because we couldn't maintain the rage for everybody during that election campaign.
And yet, from Labor's point of view, one fundamental aspect of that whole crisis was, and I stress from a Labor point of view, that the other side had torn up the rules. And if the rules had been torn up, it was a whole new ball game, was it not? Or it was a whole different ball game,
That's right.
with an awful lot at stake.
Yes, and we were having to find what the right course was in those new circumstances, and we played by the old rules. Now, I keep coming back to, and there's no way of ever knowing what the result would have been, but had we, as a union movement, demonstrated strong commitment and support to the government then, it may well have been exactly the response necessary to jolt the public into a sense that our society was coming apart because the rules had been broken.
But it was a risk, wasn't it? Because it might have also pushed the large bulk of the public even further the other way.
Oh yes, but with hindsight, the election result wasn't anything to justify that necessarily we did the right thing.
That thing about the change of the rules and that, though, I mean, it's typical of the Liberals. They are hypocrites. They are people who claim to be the natural rulers and they stand for the traditions and the constitutions and the monarchy, but when it suits them, at any stage when it suits them, and history has shown it, they'll tear up the rules and do their own thing. And what annoys me, I suppose, about the Labor Party, quite frankly, is we are the nice guys routine, and we shouldn't be, because we keep copying it. We keep getting kicked in the face. We let them tear up the rule books. We let them do what they want, and we don't play with the same tactics, and perhaps we should.
It's true, and we're not today. We're still pretty conservative. We are trying in many ways to live down the economic record we had in 75. So we have got the economy moving, it's looking fantastic, but the business community still don't accept us. And what more have we got to do?
Well, that's probably my whole point, and I think that's probably where we have some problems with the government and that today. I mean, we should not be. We should know our natural constituency, which is the trade union movement, the working people of this country. And that doesn't mean that we're not talking about in class terms, we're talking about working people, and that's our constituency, instead of trying to suck up to big business and others who will just take, grab, manipulate, maximise profits, and then kick us.
Okay.
Well, I take the... You want to ask a question?
Yeah. Well, just pick up on what you're saying.
Yeah, I just take the view that for a Labor government, a government of change, trying to create change in a fairly staid and orthodox society, you have to work twice or three times harder just to be equal. And we start with that the recognition of that sort of problem. But it imposes upon us a particular discipline that other parties don't have. And in Australia at that time, the time of the dismissal, we had lost some of our support in areas that we ought to have consolidated. And I think the lesson for us now is that we've emerged as, I think, a slightly leaner, tougher party, some would say. We've lost part of the romance that we had then, that binds the Labor soul together. And that's the thing that we need now to recover.
Well, pragmatism is a word that's used over and over again to describe governments like the Hawke government, the Rand government, etc. One aspect which is quite dramatically different between Bob Hawke's leadership and Gough Whitlam's is that Bob Hawke is demonstrably closer to the business community, probably understands the business community perhaps better in the way they operate than the Whitlam government did. So that Whitlam, in a sense, has been criticised for not having been close enough to business, but there are many people within the Labor community that criticise Bob Hawke for being too close. How do you feel about that?
Well, I think that obviously a political party to be in power consolidates its power base, wins the middle ground and divides the opposition, and that's the basic strategy that you follow. And what we have seemingly done is taken part of our basic constituency for granted and concentrated too much on the middle ground and winning the opposition. I think that that's legitimate criticism. We, however, are, I believe, flexible enough to come back and recover our power base, because this last budget, the budget in August of this year, was a budget that aimed specifically at the youth, the needs of the youth, the needs of the social welfare sector, and our whole debate over tax focused directly back on our power base. So I think that, sure, we have to be in government, and to be in government you have to win the middle ground. but there is still a realignment to make.
It's a dangerous game, though, isn't it, to actively seek to take some of the traditional ground from another party without risking the loss of part of your own traditional ground?
Well, it's the art of politics.
Didn't that happen, in fact, in the 1984 election? Didn't Labor lose part of its traditional support?
Well, I think there are a tremendous number of reasons why you could find a result in 84 to justify any conclusion. But it seemed to me that here we had wrought the miracle of economic recovery out of the depths of a recession which was only slated to get worse under the policies that were being followed, but that achievement was not recognised at the time. I think it's increasingly becoming recognised.
You see, the nature of the parties changed too through the 70s and into the 80s. We are not just a party of the working class, we're also a middle class party. Everyone in our community aspires to be middle class. And so what we've got to do now is take on a lot of some of those middle class values. One thing what people want, they want us to be economically credible. And if we don't have that credibility in that area, we'll be gone.
But how does economic credibility translate in reality?
It means doing the sort of thing we're doing now, getting the economy going, keeping inflation down. Look, one thing that's going to make us lose the next election is inflation going through the roof. That affects everyone. It affects the working class, the middle class, the business community. Now, if we can't keep that under control, the Australian electorate aren't prepared to accept us. What they want from government these days is tough leadership, and they want clear economic direction. People have just got different expectations of government now. It is leaner. If we went in to be just big spenders, we wouldn't last 5 minutes.
Well, why, if you think the government has basically been on track, why do you think that Bob Hawke personally and the party, the government, have so clearly lost a lot of the support and goodwill that they had in March of 1983? Well,
there are a few reasons. First of all, there are different expectations of a Labor government, and I agree that you just got to be twice as good as the Conservatives to win through, because expectations of us are much greater. The expectations from the business community, first of all, they expect us to be big spending. They remember the Whitlam years, so we've got to show our credibility there. On the one hand, you've got the other hand, you've got expectations built up from our traditional Labor voters who want to see those days of romance again. They want us to go back into those issues that they feel good about. And sometimes we have to just say no, and it's tough to do that.
Do you think that it's been a part of the post-75 legacy, which was partly a legacy of the Whitlam years and partly a legacy of the dismissal, that the Labor Party, and particularly Labor leaders who aspire to lead in government, to err on the side of caution, to put reform on the back burner if there's any thought that that reform might affect your chances?
I think that thing's been beaten up a lot. What people are saying is that the Whitlam, you have to cleanse yourself of the Whitlam years, and I think history will be far kinder to the Whitlam years than the immediate following of it.
But are you conscious that there has been a process of de-Whitlamisation within the party?
There has been a process, and I believe that process is probably 50% correct and 50% wrong. The total cleansing to wipe away this bad record. As I said, I think history will show that Whitlam had idealism, vision, and all those sort of things. What Ros says before, I think what we've lost is our vision, our idealism, perhaps our integrity to some extent.
Why have you lost that?
Well, I think a lot of it is the so-called cleansing process. It is perceived generally in the population that Whitlam was bad. No one knows why, but it's that perception. And so you distance yourself from that as much as you can. I believe that what we should have probably done was a proper evaluation of which part of where Whitlam went wrong and distance yourself from that. But don't sell a man down the drain for his vision and his idealism, because we don't have a lot of that around these days.
But the common perception seems to be, and you've reflected it in this discussion, that you must prove yourselves over and over and over again to the people that you are competent economic managers. Now, have you become a bit too mesmerised?
Well, I suppose if I can continue just on that thing, my personal vision is that I don't believe we should have gone that way. Yes, we do have to prove ourselves, but you don't have to over-prove yourself. You don't have to suck up to your traditional political enemies and try and show that you're better than the opposition or the last government. I think we may have gone a bit overboard in
That's
our
not sucking up.
I think
duchessing of those people.
the question is, yes, you have to be a competent economic manager, because the quality of life for most people is interpreted in economic terms, whether they've got jobs, whether they're looking forward to a better future, economically, materially. But if the dimension of what is the idealism, the sense of social justice and determination of a government to be fair, if that is subjected too much to the sense that you're good accountants, good managers, good technocrats, then the very soul of what constitutes the Labor Party is, to me, somehow a little lessened. And what we look back to, and why the Whitlam years are sentimentalised more than I think at the time that they would be justified in being, is that stands for, in contrast to the more technocratic, leaner, harder, politically direct Labor Party, that stands as a vision of romance and idealism, which is a bit of contrast with us now. And Peter's absolutely right, that we do need to show more of the vision and more of the direction, and reward people about the other things of life, because the sad truth also is, I think, that if you're very good at getting things right in the economy, then the economy ceases to be the issue. All the other things that make up the quality of life become the issue.
Do you believe that the Labor Party can throw up again and will throw up again a leader like Whitlam?
I think it's always possible in the Labor Party, because the Labor Party has all of those undercurrents and issues and people who are concerned about various aspects of social change, justice, equality, fairness for all Australians and things of that nature, which are real meaningful things for the Labor Party. And yes, it's always possible for visionaries like him to come through.
But I don't think that our government is lacking in vision. I mean, there is a motivation behind these lean economic times. That is to stay in government and to actually initiate reforms and assist people who are low-income earners and the unemployed in our community. I mean, we're not all of us aren't just in there for the good of our health, to feather our own beds.
That's really
We've
a
got to
holding
have
operation,
a
though, isn't it?
No, it's not a holding operation. I mean, we are motivated by our own personal vision, and I'm sure, the leaders the Prime Minister has his vision about where he sees a government going and who he's assisting.
Well, the message that he presented in '83 was to talk about the spirit of healing and of reconciliation. And out of that came the summits, and the last of those summits you've all seen was the tax summit, which really went nowhere, did it?
Well, I think the economic summit was the most outstanding success of healing. The tax summit was always a problem, because there is people interpret equity through their own self-interest, and the central government is the only body concerned to get the tax mix right. Everyone else is concerned to protect their self-interest, which was a problem that became manifest during the summit. But even on that criteria, the tax summit did come up with some significant consensuses, and that's important for a platform for what is, after all, the most difficult area of reform of any government in taxation.
You see, I think Keating had a vision when he was putting out option C. I mean, I think he believed with that option C that he was going to assist the poorer members of our community, the social security beneficiaries.
Sorry, Ross, we just went out.
I think it's wrong to say this government has got no vision. I mean, you look at, say, an individual minister like Keating and his option C. I mean, he was motivated by his vision of what he had to do to assist social security beneficiaries, PAYE payers, the ordinary wage and salary earners. And there are so many other ministers in this cabinet who have got vision. There's a pretty talented group, and I think everyone is motivated by their vision and view about the Labor principles and how they're implementing them.
I think that's true. What we're really saying is it needs to be projected more and understood more as a feature of this government.
Just turn that off. Is that Ross? Is it?
Yeah.
You can't turn them off.
Let's see what
Just
it
the
is.
whip. All right. Senator Peter.
As I was. I think what Roz is saying is true. What we're really talking about is the ability of the government to project a sense of vision, because we are written up in the financial pages more often than we are on the front pages about what the wide scope of government policy and direction is.
Do you think, if you look back to 1975 and then think through those 5 years with Hayden and then Bob Hawke taking over, do you think that the party has come to rely much more, and perhaps too much, on opinion poll sampling, its own private surveys, and what the public opinion polls are telling you is what public perception of you is?
I think opinion polls can get in the way of running the government, because if you do look at opinion polls all the time and worry about them and respond to them, it can often get in the way of the job that you have to do. I think that people now talking about the polls now, I wouldn't even worry about them. I'll worry about them in 2 years' time. Let's see how they are then. There's no point in worrying about them now.
Well, you came in to a marginal seat, you scraped into a marginal seat, and you survived 2 years and went out again. What were your perceptions of that 2 years, and why did you lose your seat?
Well, the first thing, I lost my seat because they changed the boundaries, very simply, and also the gentrification, for want of another word, of the class of people moving into the area were moving into the Liberal strongholds, and so that was it. My perceptions of the Parliament were, I think there was, and the others would have to say something about this, but I think that there was an excellent feeling when we came in. I mean, the feeling it was similar to the 72. We were going to do things, we were going to get things done, we were going to get the economy back on its. There was the idealism, there was the how we were going to get out there amongst the world and change all these things and right the wrongs, and it was a very exciting time to start with. But then you got bogged down in the day-to-day economic running of the country, making the budgets work, cleaning up that horrific deficit that Fraser had left, and all of a sudden, you saw your ministers, who were the bright, angry young men, basically, apart from one woman in the ministry, becoming overburdened with the responsibility of office and making the economy work. And you didn't have time to discuss or debate the other things, and people then started to get, the idealism. You're sitting there saying, well, when are we going to change the world? Well, first of all, we've got to make the budget balance or something like that, and you saw that oppression on the ministers. They changed over a period of time. That, of course, is a problem that any government faces, whatever its political colour. Except that in terms of the Labor Party, we do have ideals. We do want to change things. We are a party of reform, social change, equality, and those sort of things. Well, the Liberals don't have that problem, because all they want to do is hold power for the sake of holding power, and they just get in, and as long as they're there, they're happy. They don't actually have to do anything. It seems that one of the views of Labor, particularly post-Whitlam, is that you first get into power. And once you've got into power, you spend your first term demonstrating to the people that you're responsible, that you're competent, and that you're good managers.
You clean up the mess that you're left with.
And then in your second term, you reform. You become more of an activist government. Now,
but we're faced with particular problems, because we've spent most of this year dealing with tax reform, which is just impossible. It's had a very difficult birth.
Major reform.
And it is a major reform in this country, but it just tied up so much of the Prime Minister and the Minister's time.
But in the end, it's not a major reform, is it?
It is. It's going to be quite significant when the statement is finally announced. It's going to be the greatest tax reform package we've ever seen.
Is it going to be a redistribution of wealth?
I think it is. I think it is. Now, it's not the package that option C outlined, but there's no doubt it's still very significant reform. And I think a lot of us have had our fingers burned. And I think that I became more of a radical over tax reform. I had a lot of radical views about it, but the community weren't prepared to accept that. So we've had our fingers burned. We've got to go a bit slower on things like that.
Are you conscious, though, particularly the two of you that are still in the Parliament, that the first term was only a 2-year term? And already people, even within your party and certainly outside, are canvassing the possibility that this will be it, that you won't get back again. Are you conscious that, given that possibility, not inevitability, but that possibility, that you've really got to get cracking and try and introduce some memorable reform, if you like?
We're always depressive. The Labor Party, it breeds upon itself. I mean, because we just haven't been in government very long, whenever the least little thing goes wrong, we retreat to ourselves, we look into ourselves, see what are we doing wrong, and we accept quite often that we are going to be defeated. I think that's the wrong attitude, but it's based on the fact that we've hardly ever been in government.
Well, this really comes back to the Whitlam dismissal. This government is the government, but it's not in power. The Senate controls the passage of legislation that the government can get through, and we've got 7 Democrats there now who base their political understandings on ad hoc populist issues with no clear delineated philosophy.
Do you believe that November 11 could happen again?
I think it's a possibility that cannot be dismissed. I think there are a lot of people in the middle ground of public life these days saying that it can't happen, but were the pressures to come on that the major political prize of government of this country, at a time in which the government is unpopular, were to arise, in that sort of situation, I don't think it can be dismissed that the sort of events of December the 11th, 75 could not reoccur.
And does it rankle with you, as a long-standing Labor man, that there has been no real ongoing effort within this government to try to implement a constitutional reform to ensure that that doesn't happen again?
Well, we have made strong efforts to try and implement constitutional reform, but as everyone knows in Australia, that's one of the hardest things, aside from tax, to achieve. It's an area, though, that I think in the next couple of years we've got to spend more time trying to ensure that people in this country know that when they elect a government, they are the ones that decide who the government will be, and not some vice-regal appointee.
I'm going to have to kind of move on to cover the ground with what the time we have left. To look at the question of how Bob Hawke came into power and how Bill Hayden lost the leadership. Was Bill Hayden in some ways a victim of the events of 75 and the post-75 caution? Is there a new attitude to Labor leaders now and what they have to be and what they have to deliver?
This comes back, I think, in part to your question about polls. I don't think this party is led by polls, but we would be stupid not to pay some attention to them.
Well, very significant attention was paid to the polls in the change of leadership,
but
wasn't it?
The question for a reform party such as ours is to see not only what people think, but why they think that, and what types of reforms they would accept, and how we should therefore express and present our case to them. And that's something that we're doing, I think, extremely well. The question of the Hayden-Hawke leadership change had in the last months of it a certain inevitability anyway, and while we might all be a little sentimental about what might have been had that not occurred, the facts are that it got us into government and has given us an opportunity to address our whole program, and that's the most important thing.
But was Hayden a victim in the sense that there was so much anti-Fraser bitterness within the party that many people could not stand the prospect of another 3 years of Malcolm Fraser?
But it was more than that. It was also that we were scared of being in opposition for another 23 years. I think that's what the real concern was. It wasn't just Malcolm Fraser. It was also the thought of not getting in government at that time and what impact that would have on the party and the future of the party. There comes a time when you say, you know, you've got to win now, and if you don't win now, you don't know what the consequence is going to be for your own party. It was a time we had to win in that election, or else we may not have been in for the whole of the 80s.
Who would you nominate, each of you, quickly starting with Peter? This Peter.
Yeah.
Who would you nominate of all the current crop of Labor leaders? Who would you nominate as being the most Labor?
Oh, that's an unfair question. It's asking me to differentiate between my colleagues. I think that there's no doubt that all of them are committed to the ideals of the Labor Party. Certainly some have different emphasis about which ideals to pursue, but I have no difficulty in supporting all of them. There are some that I support.
Sounds like you're very neatly ducking the question, though. Who would you most identify with as a leader who reflects all of the best elements of Labor traditions?
Well, I certainly think that Gough did in many respects.
Current crop.
Current crop. Well, I think that's an unfair question.
Ros?
None of us are going to answer that.
I never preempt the party decisions.
Well, you are out of the Parliament now, Peter. You can be a little more frank, surely.
I'm still in the party and in a variety of positions at different levels.
But it's not asking you to criticise some of the leaders. I'm simply asking you to nominate which of the current crop, and we've just run out of time.
But it's a stupid question.
No, actually, I actually had to understand that comment.
That's a problem when you don't go live.
It can work to your advantage too, Ros.
That could have been a very cutting comment, then, Ros.
It's all right, we're never mind.
All right. Peter, Acting Peter Steedman, of all the Labor leaders today, which of those would you most identify with as a leader who most reflects traditional Labor values?
I don't think I probably identify with most of them.
Any of them?
No, not really. I think if you're talking about traditional Labor values, and we're talking, it depends what school, if you're talking about the old school and the Irish Catholic tradition and those sort of things, Lionel Bowen would represent a lot of those values.
Well, in terms of old traditions, have those days gone?
Yes.
I don't think
For the
they
better?
have gone.
It's pretty hard to just be blanket about that. We are living in a continuum. We're not sort of chopping off the past and then trying to develop for the future. There is a constancy of and a fair spread of age representation in the Labor Party. Its traditional roots are firmly represented, as is the people who are grappling with the challenges of the future, and that's as it properly should be.
See, what are you talking about? It's a very simplistic view. When you're talking about the old traditional views, are you talking about the blokes who are going, and they're all blokes, who are going to get up there and wear their cardigan and pull their sleeves up and get in amongst the grease?
Traditions like the Labor Party always being associated with change and reform and leading the thinking towards change within a community.
Well, there's no doubt we're doing that. I've got no doubts that we're doing that. You've got to only look at the alternative. I mean, what are they going to do?
And it's the reason why it is the Labor Party, and it's the reason why we're members of it. And that's what we are in politics to do.
There's always a debate about the pace of change, and that's the biggest problem we're having within our own party, because we've got pressure on us to move faster. Now, that's quite a legitimate role for our branch membership, to be trying to push us that way, but it's also a very legitimate role for government to determine the pace of reform.
If you do find yourselves out of office at the end of this next term, and I acknowledge that you've still got some time to run, will you...
2.5 years.
Will you? 2.5 years. Do you think that you'll personally feel that that it has been a very valuable time for a Labor government? Do you think, on the basis of what's happened so far, that you'll be able to look back on this period of government as one of great achievement, or one where perhaps you could have gone faster?
Well, I'll think back about all of those people that wouldn't have had jobs had we not been in government, and all of that, mainly working class people from the base from which I come from, who would have had no prospects at all had the economy been running in the way in which it did. But those living in welfare that had no prospects, those in fact in the education system, and the young people that our youth package is now addressing, all of those things are matters of considerable pride to us. I think that what we were saying earlier is that we do need to, however, project the wider vision, and we're starting to do that in 2.5 years' time. I'm sure that we'll be able to look back on with great pride on a series of achievements which are just not economic achievements, but achievements across the whole scale of political interests.
I had a term in opposition. I saw the impact that those Fraser years had on the lives of ordinary people. I saw the middle-aged men coming into me in tears because they couldn't get a job. They had no future. We've changed all that. There is a future now for young people and for people who want to work in our community. And we've restored people's dignity. And I think that's a considerable improvement.
Malcolm Fraser would undoubtedly say that. As you say that you inherited a mess, he would say that he inherited a mess, and that part of his mess was very high unemployment created under the Labor government.
Look, he had 7 years to get over that. He had control of the Senate. He had a huge majority, and he didn't take any action with all those advantages he had.
And there's been more growth in the Australian economy in the 2.5 years that we've occupied the Treasury benches than in all of the years of the Fraser period. So, if we just look at who performed better on those figures, it just has to be us.
Very
the rest is rhetoric.
Very briefly, do you believe that the trade union movement has given the Hawke government a fair go under the Accord?
More than a fair go. I think the trade union movement has shown the responsibility of the trade union movement, how a Labor government and the trade union movement can work together. The Accord has been the basis of the Hawke government's economic strategies, and the union movement has been highly responsible in its attitude to that.
I think it has been responsible to date. I think we're coming up to a big test. The union movement has got a lot of gains out of a Labor government, and I think the great majority recognise that. It has to be always a give and take process. You can't just take from either one side or the other.
It's the reason why we can be proud of our economic record, because without the Accord and without the partnership between the ACTU and the government, and on the other hand too, let's not forget it, business too has been an active partner in this, that we wouldn't have been able to achieve the economic gains that we have.
If in fact the trade union movement, which you're saying has been responsible under the Accord, decides over the next 12 or 18 months that the Accord is no longer workable as a result of policies of your government, of a Labor government, do you think that it's that could be read as a very large part of Labor's traditional base saying, we don't believe you are accurately any longer representing Labor voters?
Well, if you say that a house divided against itself can't stand, if that's what the question is, of course the answer to that is yes, it's true, it can't stand. But we have a close association with the union movement, which has been proven over the last 2.5 years. There are challenges, as Ros says, in the future, but there's a great deal of men and women in the union movement that understand that working together with this government is the best way, that working with a Liberal government is no choice at all.
In families,
and we will surmount those challenges, I'm confident.
You don't think there's a danger that it might just become easy for this government, given a range of difficult options, to keep going back to the trade unions and saying, just go with us one more time, fellas?
You've got to remember what the alternative is. And within families there's always going to be squabbles, but ultimately you've got to stick together because the alternative is not palatable at all.
Do you not necessarily? I mean, that's nice to say that you've got to stick together, but the realities may well be quite different.
It's based on enlightened self-interest. The question from the union movement point of view is, can they do better in some other scenario? The answer through the whole of the Fraser period is no, they couldn't. And the question for the Labor government is, can we win an election without the union movement support? The answer is no, we cannot. And that means that we've just got to resolve those problems, and they're serious and difficult, but that's the art of politics. That's why we're here.
Okay.
Sorry.